Welcome to my channel. Today I am going to talk about some cities of America which are almost dead. But friends, just because they are dead doesn't mean no one lives there anymore. Some people still live there, communities still exist. Any city being dead means that its economy has ended, and there are no job opportunities there. If I put it in simple words, then that city where there is no facility of any kind. Friends, earlier these cities were very prosperous and the population here was also very high. But time is the most powerful thing. It spares no one. Earlier there used to be big empires, but with time they also came to an end. Nothing is forever here. One day everything has to end, and the days of these cities were also over. That is why today their condition has become such, that no one lives here anymore. So friends, let us know which are those cities which have died and also know the reason for it. So friends, our first city is Detroit. We're going to kick things off with Detroit, the Motor City, a place that symbolizes both the rise and decline of American industry. Back in the 20th century, Detroit was the beating heart of America's automotive industry. Names like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler weren't just companies, they were empires, and Detroit was their throne. The city was booming. With well-paying jobs, the middle class grew, and Detroit became a beacon of the American dream. The city's peak was around the 1950s when its population reached nearly 2 million people. Beautiful neighborhoods, lively shopping districts, and a thriving music scene, especially the birth of Motown, made Detroit a cultural hub. People from all over the country, and even the world, flocked to Detroit for job opportunities in the factories. Owning a car made in Detroit was a badge of honor. But then, things took a turn for the worse. By the 1970s, the American auto industry started facing stiff competition from abroad, particularly from Japan and Germany. Cars from these countries were more fuel efficient, and the American companies were slow to adapt. Meanwhile, automation and outsourcing of jobs to other countries cut the workforce in half. As manufacturing plants shut down or moved, unemployment soared. In 2013, Detroit became the largest city in U.S. history to declare bankruptcy, with over $18 billion in debt. While there have been efforts to revitalize downtown, and some industries are returning, large parts of the city remain desolate. There are entire blocks of Detroit where not a single house is occupied, where nature has reclaimed what was once urban sprawl. Driving through these parts of the city feels like driving through a post-apocalyptic landscape. Yet, despite all this, Detroit still has a heartbeat. Artists and entrepreneurs are trying to bring life back to certain areas. But let's be real, while parts of Detroit might revive, the city, as it once was, is gone forever. So friends, this was the reason why this city, Detroit, has come to an end. So now our next city is Gary, a city that rose and fell with the steel industry. Founded in 1906 by the United States Steel Corporation, Gary was built for one purpose, to produce steel. And for many years, it did just that. Like Detroit with its cars, Gary was synonymous with steel production. At its height, the city was home to tens of thousands of steelworkers who enjoyed high-paying jobs that supported their families and allowed them to live the American dream. In the early 20th century, Gary was a bustling industrial town with a growing population. The city had theaters, shopping districts, and beautiful homes for the working class. It was the quintessential American industrial city. But like many cities in the Rust Belt, Gary's fortunes were tied directly to its industry. In the 1960s, the American steel industry began to decline due to a combination of factors, including competition from overseas and technological advancements that reduced the need for labor. Gary was hit hard. As the steel mills slowed production or shut down entirely, the jobs dried up, and people began to leave. Between 1960 and today, Gary's population dropped by more than 50%. As residents fled, businesses closed, homes were abandoned, and entire neighborhoods fell into decay. Today, Gary is a shell of its former self. Boarded-up houses and empty streets dominate much of the city. The downtown area is nearly deserted, with crumbling buildings and vacant lots replacing the once thriving business district. The city's crime rate remains high, and poverty is rampant. Some initiatives have tried to turn Gary into a hub for transportation or logistics, but these efforts have yet to yield any meaningful results. So our next city is Camden, a city that's had a rough time for decades. Camden's story is one of rapid industrialization followed by swift deindustrialization, a cycle that has affected many American cities. Located just across the river from Philadelphia, Camden was once an important manufacturing hub. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, shipbuilding, manufacturing, and other industries made Camden a prosperous place to live and work. However, like many other cities, Camden's fortunes started to decline in the mid-20th century. Factories closed, jobs were outsourced, and unemployment skyrocketed. But Camden's problems didn't stop with job losses. Crime rates began to rise, and the city became infamous for its violent crime and poverty. In the 1970s and 1980s, Camden was regularly ranked as one of the most dangerous cities in the United States. Today, Camden is still grappling with the legacy of deindustrialization. The city's population has shrunk dramatically, and many of its neighborhoods are riddled with poverty and blight. Vacant lots and abandoned buildings are common sights in the city, and despite its proximity to Philadelphia, Camden has struggled to attract new investment. There have been efforts to revitalize parts of Camden, particularly along the waterfront, where developments like the Adventure Aquarium and the BB&T Pavilion have brought some tourism and entertainment dollars into the city. However, these efforts have done little to improve conditions for many of Camden's residents, who continue to face high levels of unemployment and poverty. So now the next city is Youngstown, another Rust Belt city that has seen better days. Like Gary, Youngstown was built on steel. For much of the 20th century, Youngstown's steel mills were a major part of the city's identity and economy. In fact, Youngstown was so synonymous with steel production that the city became known as Steeltown, USA. But as with many other cities on this list, Youngstown's fortunes were tied to the health of the American steel industry. In the 1970s, the steel industry in the United States began to collapse. In 1977, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, one of the city's largest employers, closed its doors. This was a devastating blow to the city's economy. Thousands of workers were laid off, and the city was plunged into a deep recession. Over the next few decades, Youngstown continued to lose jobs and residents. By the early 2000s, the city's population had shrunk by more than half from its peak in the 1950s. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned, and like Detroit and Gary, much of the city was left to decay. In recent years, there have been efforts to revitalize Youngstown by tearing down abandoned homes and trying to attract new industries. Some success has been found in areas like healthcare and education, but the city still faces significant challenges. Poverty rates remain high, and many parts of the city are still marked by empty buildings and vacant lots. What's unique about Youngstown is that the city has embraced its decline in some ways. Rather than trying to return to its industrial past, Youngstown is focusing on right-sizing itself for the future. The city has launched programs to shrink its footprint by demolishing vacant homes and converting empty lots into green spaces. It's an interesting approach, but whether it will be enough to bring lasting change remains to be seen. So let's move on to our next city, which is Flint. Flint's story is, unfortunately, well known due to the water crisis that has plagued the city since 2014, but its decline started long before that. Much like Detroit, Flint's rise was tied to the auto industry. It was the birthplace of General Motors, and for much of the 20th century, Flint was a thriving city with a strong middle class. In the 1980s, as General Motors began to downsize and shift production to other locations, Flint was hit hard. Thousands of jobs were lost, and the city's economy spiraled downward. By the 2000s, Flint was struggling with high unemployment, poverty, and crime. But the real disaster came in 2014 when the city switched its water supply to the Flint River as a cost-saving measure. This decision led to lead contamination in the city's drinking water, causing a public health crisis that has yet to be fully resolved. The water crisis has devastated Flint's already struggling population. The long-term effects of lead exposure on children, combined with the economic challenges the city already faced, have left Flint in a dire situation. Despite efforts to fix the water system, trust in the city's government remains low, and many residents feel abandoned by the state and federal government. Flint is a city that has been through more than its fair share of hardships. Its population has dropped by over 50% since its peak, and while there are efforts to bring businesses back to the area, the city still faces enormous challenges. So these were our 5 cities which are now dead, and now it seems almost impossible for them to come back alive. The economy, infrastructure and industries here have all been destroyed. And without all these things no city can survive. It is very sad that these cities are now dead, but at the same time we should also take care that this does not happen in future. This is also a big lesson for us. So friends, that's all in today's video. If you feel that we have made some mistake, then you can tell us in the comment section, and if you like this video, then subscribe to the channel. I will meet you in the next video.